Welcome to Man in America, a voice of reason in a world gone mad. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. Looking around the country right now, especially looking at LA, we're seeing chaos. And if you look at the indicators of what's to come, it's more chaos, right? So the riots that we're seeing out in California, there's actually, I'll pull it up for you, there's a website called No Kings. And I'll go over this more in the show as well, but I'll pull this up. This website, nokings.org, it shows you exactly what's going on. And so on June 14th, that is when they're planning for nationwide protests. So you can even go on a map and you can say, hey, okay, let me look up my zip code and figure out where I live, and you can find a protest near you. So now, not to say that all these protests are going to be violent, Antifa, burning down buildings. I imagine most of them won't be, but you can imagine, especially in a lot of the bigger cities where the police forces are compromised, this could probably get very hairy. And so joining me today is Derek Broze, who is someone that I've had on before. He's a very, very free thinker. And one of his main focuses as an investigative journalist is the rise of technocracy, the threat of technocracy, the threat of digital and AI-driven systems being used as a weapon against us. And so what we're going to be looking at today is the ICE, or these riots, these kind of anti-ICE riots out in California. Are they some sort of bigger picture, false flag, PSYOP type event to get more Americans on board with a Palantir digital AI prison system? I guess that's the best thing you can call it, right? There's another thing. Let's see if I can find the post I hear. I think I closed. Yeah, it's right here. So ICE is, here's an article. ICE is paying Palantir $30 million to build immigration OS surveillance platform. And so again, this kind of ties into the overall concern. Is this the Hegelian dialectic, right? Is this the problem, reaction, solution? Problem, all these immigrants flooding in, we can't track them. The reaction is everyone's upset, everyone's scared. The solution is digital ID, digital surveillance. So that way we know which ones are the bad ones. But the problem is those systems can always be turned on us. And actually, most likely, they more often than not end up always being turned on us. And so we're going to be breaking down all this on today's show with Derek Broze. Derek, it's great to have you back on the show, man. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it. Looks like there's a lot to get into today.
Yeah, there is. I mean, really since Trump's presidency, if we're looking at AI and digital prison type stuff, from the very beginning, with the announcement of Project Stargate with Larry Ellison, and it was kind of like, okay, is this a one-off, or is it, should we be worried? And now we've got Palantir and we got Peter Thiel, and there's just, objectively looking at this, it's not good what's being built around us. And now we have these massive riots out in LA, which we'll be getting into. We've got plans for riots across the country, and we've also got prominent conservative voices. Actually, I'll pull up right here. Laura Logan saying, time to deploy Palantir tech to LA to deal with the illegals. You'd love to see it. You're lying if you say you wouldn't. Well, I'm not lying and saying I don't want to see that weapon unleashed against an enemy, because how long is it before it's unleashed upon me? And so there's a lot to get into, but I'll just kind of, I'll toss all that stuff your way, and just wherever you want to start with this discussion.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I'll say on one hand, it's a good thing that Palantir is part of the ongoing conversation, not only just in the independent media, alternative media space, which has been increasing, I think, since the election. I think you're aware that myself and others have been warning that there was going to be a rise in Palantir due to Peter Thiel and the association with J.D. Vance and support for Trump. Even prior to the election, we're telling people this is likely where things were going to go. And I'm sad to say that it appears to be correct. So on one hand, it's okay. I'm glad more people are talking about it. Maybe a little too late, hopefully not. And even the mainstream's joining the conversation. Of course, it does make me skeptical or suspicious of why is it okay to talk about this right now? Is it too late to do anything about it? Is there other moves being made? And then, as you said, this is all sort of in the context of the larger conversation around the immigration issue, which is itself, I think, a very useful way to divide people over, what their stances are on that. And I'm sure even some of my stances might be controversial to some in in that regard. But I think ultimately that is what we're seeing, is we're seeing the use of immigration, the fear of, legitimate fear of criminals coming in and things of that sort being used to label people gang members and then deport them, sort of with very little to no due process. In my mind, gang member is just the new domestic terrorist, or the new COVID denier, or the new post 9/11, domestic terrorist, extremist, etc. It's another label that, while there is some basis in reality, we could clearly see how it's going to be, that use will be broadened and applied to all kinds of people. And it's been kind of disturbing for me to see people who just 2, 3, 4 years ago during COVID 1984 were very vocal about people being labeled these things and being, protests being kind of attacked, or people being taken out of their homes, depending on what country you're speaking about. And some of those same people now not seeing how this label of gang member, et cetera, is playing the same role. It's doing the same thing, Again, not to deny that there aren't real issues around immigration, but I think that's probably, maybe the first fine point I would make is that I think that's what more and more people need to take away, is that the way that the predator class, the ruling class, the pyramid of power operates is very much through psychological operations, as we know, and through fifth generation warfare. And what that means is that we are very rarely, if ever, faced with a simple, this is a good choice and this is a bad choice. In fact, I think it's often that we're given two bad choices and neither move we make will be good for the people. So just to kind of outline that a little bit, illegal immigration is allowed to increase during the Biden years. And obviously it was still happening during Trump and Obama. It's been happening for years, but it definitely increased during Biden. And people were showing a lot of stories about that, particularly in right-wing media. Some of those were fake and were exaggerated stories, and some of them were real. And a lot of people still believe, I think, some of these fake stories. But the point was, people got the message. You're in danger. Illegals are flooding. This is an invasion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That was sort of ramped up and hyped up, and of course, promoted by Trump and his people. We're going to come in. We're going to fix it. We're going to have the largest deportation operation ever. We're going to get rid of all the bad guys. And a lot of people are like, that's what I voted for. That's what I want. I want to feel safe again, et cetera. And we know how fear of safety or loss of safety is always used in these operations. So that sort of happens. And the reaction is, please make me feel safer. Whatever you got to do. If that means increase the militarization of the border, if that means I need to have a digital ID, if that means we need a biometric entry-exit system, as Trump has called for, that's great. As long as we can get rid of all these illegals and these gang members, then I'm okay with it. And of course, the reaction is exactly what the predator class wanted all along, which is to increase the militarization, to increase surveillance. So that is to say, it doesn't mean that the immigration isn't an issue that shouldn't be discussed or paid attention to, or solutions shouldn't be pursued. But ultimately, as I said, we get one bad option versus the other. Do nothing and just let illegal immigration and bad people sneak in with other people who maybe are literally just trying to come and empower themselves and better their lives, whether legally or otherwise. Or support a police state in the pursuit of trying to stop those bad people, right? Neither choice is really, one that I think any freedom-loving person should just blindly embrace. But that is what's been placed before us. And I think that's really kind of where we're at. It makes it more difficult for people to kind of navigate this minefield because, again, they can see that there's immigration is a problem. And if somebody says, Trump's being bad, he's violating due process, he's going after the people, they're like, what are you, some radical leftist? You don't care about immigration, you just want open borders and this and that. They have that sort of visceral reaction. And then on the other side, again, people who see the increase of the militarization and the police force, typically at the moment, people who are more left-leaning, they're reacting to that. They're coming out to protest and push back against this. And it kind of just continues that false dichotomy of left versus right, because this side is all for it, maybe not thinking too deeply about it, and this side is completely against it without maybe thinking about the nuances of immigration that do exist. And then it all just gets sort of lost in the middle. And then you end up with two groups who, in my view, are cheering for their own enslavement on either side, and it's just it's not an easy black and white situation as some of our peers and other podcasters and journalists might like it to believe, because that makes for easy reporting when it's just, here's the bad guys, here's the good guys. I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. And again, we're not really in a position where we have good options.
Unfortunately, you're absolutely right. It's just a classic, Hegelian dialectic, right? It's, project or problem, reaction, solution. But I feel like that it's like we're constantly stuck in like a pincher movement, right? Where it's like wherever you go, there's these two opposing forces that are always kind of drawing you towards one place. Now, I want to pull up a tweet. This is from the Patriot Voice, John Sable. He's a friend of mine, and I appreciate his honesty in kind of calling things out. But I want to read through this because this really helps kind of set the stage for a lot of our discussion. It really, kind of highlights exactly what you've been saying. So he says, in talking about the riots right now, he says they intentionally create the problem, illegal immigration, to then elicit a reaction from the people so they can then present the solution, which is the Palantir-powered AI surveillance police state. Now, just on a side note, I've got actually, let's see, we're a little news article here I was going to show you. Yeah, ICE is paying Palantir $30 million to build immigration OS surveillance platform. Okay, so we'll get into that. He continues, though, he says, this is called the Hegelian dialectic in the good cop versus bad cop scenario. The Democrats play the side of the bad cop, encouraging, facilitating, and enabling illegal immigration while busing in Soros-funded Antifa to destroy cities when ICE tries to deport them. The Republicans, MAGA, play the side of the good cop by encouraging, facilitating, and enabling ICE, SWAT team, and even wanting the military to fix the problem quickly, which would literally be against the law because of the Posse Comitatus Act. Did I pronounce that right? Posse Comitatus. I think so. And it says it is an illusion.
Yeah, that's for those who aren't aware.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say that's the law that's supposed to prevent military from being in civilian interactions.
Oh, okay. Thank you. He says it's an illusion that either one side or the other side is working for the good of the American people. It's a carefully crafted psyop and false flag designed to manipulate the public at large into accepting this AI police state, all in the name of your government keeping you safe from terrorism. In time, this will be weaponized against all of us. It is clear that many have learned absolutely nothing since the passage of the Patriot Act, which is where this all started and is now morphed into a monster. They're going to go through as many major cities as it takes to get us to accept this totalitarian response. It will get noticeably worse and worse. And other sides, both sides of the coin are working for the benefit of making the foundation of the AI police state surveillance apparatus, doing the bidding of their masters at the WEF and UN. What we are witnessing is the state intentionally creating chaos to then bring in a new world order police state system in which dissent will be swiftly crushed and what is left of our rights will be completely and totally eviscerated. So I wanted to just kind of see your thoughts on this. But in addition to that, I'd like you to also kind of explain what Palantir is. But I'll let you kind of respond to what John said there.
I think that Patriot Voice there, John, perfectly outlined what I've been trying to warn about since, personally for me, this is something I've sort of anticipated was coming since the very first Trump administration. I have videos on the consciousresistance.com warning about how the fight against illegal immigration was going to be weaponized to be used to build and empower the police state. And one of the ways to do that is, of course, Palantir. As you showed a moment ago, there's reports about Palantir working directly with ICE. For those who don't know, Palantir was a company that was actually founded right after 9/11. So post 9/11, hysteria, got to catch the terrorists everywhere. There was a program that launched called Total Information Awareness that not too many people might be aware of. It was a government program. You may have seen the logo out there, and it is a real logo. It was a picture of the Earth, a globe of the Earth with an all-seeing eye pyramid sort of looking over it. And that was the original logo for the Total Information Awareness Program. But it's, to me, it's a sign of how far things have gone, because 22 years ago when this program was coming out, people were actually resistant about it. There was, organizations like the ACO and others were writing about it. Even the mainstream was writing, saying this could be a danger to Americans' privacy and liberty. But that all
this
changed.
is really their logo?
Right there.
Like, that's literally their logo.
Yeah, so the Total Information Awareness, Total Information Awareness was a program of the Information Awareness Office, and that was actually the DARPA government logo right there. No joke. And it was like I think that the powers that wish they were post 9/11 thought, okay, we can roll out the full New World Order, and they were kind of testing it, and then there was still too much pushback. But here we are 20 years later, and you got people like Laura Loomer saying, hey, roll out Palantir and use them to spy on the protesters or whatever. But what's important for people to understand is, so post 9/11, Total Information Awareness, it's a program to log all of our actions, spy on everything we do, things that seem kind of mundane now, but 20 years ago were a bit scarier. They've already been normalized, unfortunately. And because of the public pushback, they did two things. First, they renamed it from total information awareness to terrorist information awareness. They're like, okay, maybe that's a little too on the nose. So they put it terrorist information awareness. And then after enough public outcry, they actually shut down the office. I think it was 2005 when it actually shut down. It might have even been the end of 2003. And since then, though, most informed digital privacy researchers have been able to account for all the different programs that they were going to put under TIA have actually just been separated and piecemeal put in other departments and other government agencies, right? So we didn't actually stop it. We just temporarily delayed it, and they took with this part and said, okay, well, we'll put that under the NSA, we'll put this under this agency. And here we are 22 years later, and they've effectively got that program.
Here's the hard truth. Every 6 years, your dollar loses half its buying power. That means a $100,000 savings account today could feel like $50,000 by 2031. And you see it every time you fill up your tank, buy groceries, or pay the bills. Prices are up. Your dollar's down. But there's a simple way to protect the value of your savings with something real, something proven. Gold. An asset that holds its value over time. And that's why I trust Noble Gold Investments. They make it simple to protect your savings with physical gold or silver. No high-pressure sales, no call centers, just honest guidance, one-on-one support, and transparent pricing. And right now, when you open a qualified account, Noble Gold will send you a free 10-ounce silver American flag bar as a thank you. So head over to goldwithseth.com or call 626-654-1906 today to learn more. Again, that's goldwithseth.com or 626-654-1906. Don't just protect your wealth, preserve its power.
The other important detail is that when total information awareness was closed down, some of the architects of that program, including John Poindexter, started to meet with two men who were just then forming a new company in 2003, 2004, by the name of Alex Karp and Peter Thiel. And these are the co-founders, among others, of Palantir. And of course, Palantir is the name for the sort of all-seeing eye orb in The Lord of the Rings. These guys are obsessed with The Lord of the Rings, so they named a lot of their companies and projects after it. And so what they did was they realized that, okay, if we can't do this through the government, if the people aren't going to allow this, there's just too much resistance right now, why don't we start working in the so-called private sector? And I say that with air quotes because I don't think if you're taking millions of dollars from the government, if your first client is the CIA, if your first investor is the CIA's venture capital firm, EnQtel, I don't know how private you can really say you are, but nevertheless, they say they're a private company. And so the government worked with Palantir to create these systems that now more and more people are aware of. And so fast forward to 2025, Trump's second administration, Palantir has dozens and dozens of contracts across the US government. ICE is only one of them. They're also partnering with the IRS. You know, you can forget abolishing the IRS. Now we're going to use Palantir to make it more efficient. And there's more and more areas. I actually wrote an article recently at the Last American Vagabond called Welcome to the Palantir World Order that sort of outlines these different programs, the different agencies that Palantir is working with, as well as all the different Palantir and Peter Thiel acolytes who are in the Trump administration and also in Doge with Elon Musk. And there's at least 20 to 25 that I've found that are in very important key positions that worked for Peter Thiel's foundation or worked for Palantir themselves, or some sort of affiliated organization, because these guys like to start a lot of groups and venture funds and things like that. The other thing to remember is that both Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, again, the co-founders of this company, which is started with CIA funding and is now very interlocked with the second Trump administration, both of those men are also steering committee members of the Bilderberg Group, which is actually going to be meeting this week. So how the independent media did not see the red flags coming prior to the election, I have no idea. But I know that I was writing many articles saying you have Bilderberg supporters, World Economic Forum supporters, young global leaders, and Zionist technocrats on both sides of the 2024 election. It wasn't that Kamala was going to be better or anything like that, but it was, I think, that nobody had any faith in Kamala, but a lot of people thought Trump was here to save the day. And that is why I was so, adamant of warning people against that, not because I'm Democrat or because I thought, there was a better choice. It was just that I could see that there was a game being played. The rug was going to be pulled under people. And here we are, we're barely 6 months into it. And I think, thankfully, there's more people asking these questions, but we've got 3.5 more years to go. Who knows what's up next?
So looking at Palantir and how to kind of piece together the bigger picture, right? Looking at the macro of this entire situation, we have Trump announcing the Project Stargate, which was like, I think is a $500 billion series of data centers, right, for competing with AI running data. So obviously central to a digital police state is your data centers, right? This is the brain of the entire operation. And so is Palantir basically the machine that sits at the middle of this, that's pulling in all this data, all the surveillance, all the video feeds, all the social media, tax records, social security information, everything. And that's kind of the central AI brain that would then run potentially a kind of digital police state. Is that the role that how Palantir would fit into this?
I do think that that is fairly accurate to say. I don't want to say they're the only company because, of course, big tech and the government, all they're very close. And you've got companies like OpenAI, but of course, OpenAI was part of the Stargate announcement you mentioned. Just a sidebar: OpenAI, Oracle, also another company started with CIA seed funding. It just doesn't stop when you start digging in. But Palantir is, I do think, a unique company, not only because of what I stated before, that CIA funding, Bilderberg steering committee members, clearly an important company, clearly playing, very influential roles. And Peter Thiel kind of single-handedly funded JD Vance's original Senate run in Ohio, which you could argue led to him becoming vice president. And obviously he's pretty much seen as next in line after Trump. So you end up with a Bilderberg, Palantir approved technocrat in office. The danger of Palantir specifically, I would say, are a couple of things. For one, yes, their AI program, they have their own set of AI that they're using. And people may have heard the term Lavender. Lavender is an AI-based program that is powered by Palantir, which is actually helping the Israeli government target Palestinians. They claim it's just to target Hamas terrorists, but anybody who's been watching clips online for the last 2 years can see what's really going on. And also, you can just look at the words of Alex Karp and Peter Thiel himself. They've said openly, the company put out a big letter that they printed in the New York Times saying, "We stand with Israel," and they're proud of what they're doing. And they say, okay, occasionally some innocent people might be killed, but we're making things more efficient. So Lavender is one part of their AI program. There's also the Gotham program, which is a program that I encourage people, those of you who are interested in doing this type of research, to file open records request or Freedom of Information Act request with your local police department. File Houston Police Department as an example, Foundry, Gotham, these are some of the programs that they're using. And you probably would end up seeing that your local police department is already using this software, because there are many dozens and dozens of police departments. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Los Angeles Police Department, I know we're going to talk about them soon, are already using this software to they sell it all on the guise of, we're going to use this to track criminals better, we're going to use this to find the bad guys, which is what we've always heard from post 9/11. And then the Foundry program that I mentioned. Foundry is what got the attention of the New York Times, where this first sort of bringing it into the mainstream. And this goes back to the fact that I think it was March, Trump did an executive order where he said he was going to streamline a lot of the federal government agencies and to remove the silos. So basically what they argue is that, like, all the different agencies are so siloed and separated that they're not able to properly communicate. And that's how things like 9/11 happened. Again, this goes to the official story of 9/11, that, well, the CIA knew this and the FBI knew this, but they just couldn't communicate because of our silly, arcane, out of date laws. And so we need to have more fusion of all these different government agencies. And so Trump's executive order was another step in that direction. Well, the New York Times reported that Palantir's Foundry is part of that, that's one of the programs they're using to start streamlining these agencies, to start taking down the walls between them. Now, in a perfect world, in an ideal world, which we're not living in, you could argue that could be a good thing for people, right? Maybe the government would run more effectively, and it would only target bad guys, and the people would have more peaceful lives and all that sort of thing. But I think we all understand that's not the scenario we're living in. We're not living with angels running government, and I don't know if we ever will be in that situation. So then you end up with people who we know seem to like power, both left and right. This isn't just about Donald Trump, of course, who seem to like power, who are in control of massive amounts of data that in many cases we've all been voluntarily giving over to them through social media, through apps and phones and everything else that we, depending on how you live your life, you may have all the devices in your home listening to you all the time. So there's companies like Palantir, Clearview AI, which is another Peter Thiel funded company, who've been just hoovering up all that data and then creating databases of facial recognition, AI platforms, and things of this sort. And they're using it privately to sell to militaries, to sell to police departments, and of course to sell to government. So it's a worrisome situation, and I do think Palantir is as I said earlier, is something that more people need to be paying attention to. And if you see this name Palantir, you see this name Peter Thiel, I'm not saying you should automatically assume everything associated with them is evil, but it should give you some pause. And I would encourage you to dig further when you see their names crop up, because they are a big player in this, and I don't think they're going anywhere. This is why I said, earlier, I called my article "Welcome to the Palantir World Order," because I think that's, at least for the moment, we'll see, right? They're the face right now for the moment.
So I feel like that what we're up against is technocracy. Like that's really kind of, if you were to, people have all these ideas of, okay, who are the ruling elites, and what is the pyramid of power? Now you've done multiple series on that, but it's just this idea that, okay, they're the oligarchs and we're the slave class. But when you understand technocracy and the role of the technocrat, like with the size of the world and the diversification of the world, that's the only way you could have a centralized one world government, is through highly advanced digital architecture, right? To achieve that. Now, I want to pull up a quote from Brzezinski that you wrote back in 1970. He says, the Technocratic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. Soon it will be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance over every citizen and maintain up-to-date complete files containing even the most personal information about the citizen. These files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities. It's crazy that that quote came from 1970, right? When it's like, oh man, like so much has happened since then. But one question I have for you is that when you piece all this together and you look at Trump's run and how towards kind of the latter end of his run for this most recent win, you had all the big tech CEOs coming out and supporting him, right? Elon Musk, obviously, front and center, but Peter Thiel, Bezos, Zuckerberg, all these different, kind of very powerful people that just the previous year or a couple of years before were censoring, even kicking Trump off their own platforms, were labeling you and I as terrorists and everything. So there's this weird about face where now they're all of a sudden they're pro-Trump, and Elon Musk is all about freedom and he buys X and he unleashes us. Now we have free speech again. But when you piece together the origins of these companies and you look at Facebook, right? Because it was DARPA LifeLog, right? The DARPA had LifeLog, which was their own kind of military industrial complex version of Facebook as like a mass data and surveillance system. The day that ends is the day Facebook is born, right? You even have Google, which I think Google was funded early on by the NSA. I think DARPA was also involved. You've got In-Q-Tel, being a Palantir. So if you take a step back, you look at it and say, wow, all of these like major, massive, multinational tech companies all have ties to the military industrial complex and the alphabet agencies, and really these deep state apparatuses that are, have trillions in black budget funds to do whatever they want. So kind of piecing this all together, do you think that the controllers, or whatever you want to call them, right, the elites or the technocrats, saw the momentum and probably used AI to predict trends and everything, and saw the momentum behind Trump and thought Trump can be our guy to actually bring in the digital infrastructure needed to create a global police state? And that's why they all backed him. That's why they got around him. That's why, even if hypothetically Trump had the best of intentions and was thinking, I'm going to come in and I'm going to restore America, what politician isn't beholden to, was it Miriam Adelson who donated was $150 million, right? Yeah. There's still these relationships happening behind closed doors. So do you think that a lot of that movement that we saw with these quote unquote tech CEOs, which are really kind of in a lot of ways front men for military industrial complex, military grade surveillance and data systems, that basically that was what was going on here, is that is kind of like a bait and switch where now we've got this.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think about that?
So you said a lot of good things there, and just to answer the question right off the bat, yes, I do think that's what's happening. I do want to just take a step back about the Brzezinski quote, just to make it clear, because I've seen that quote and others being shared around, and I think some people who maybe don't know who he is sort of look at it as like, oh my God, this guy was trying to warn us back in the '70s, but he was a complete deep state agent. He was an advisor to Carter all the way through Obama, nearly every single president. He was involved with funding the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, like helping create Al Qaeda. Like this is not a good guy here. And I
He's like
wrote
a
about him.
Kissinger, right?
Yeah, he's like right there with Kissinger. They helped start the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. Trilateral Commission goes back to Columbia University, which was the home of the original technocrat movement in the 1930s. So just to make that clear, like this is not a guy warning us. This is a guy telling us the plan ahead of time. This is often what these deep state agents do. You know, nobody in our circles or just even the average person tends to read David Rockefeller's memoirs or a book by Zbigniew Brzezinski. It was called America Between Two Ages, the Technotronic Era, where he's describing this. And I've said for a while that, you know, the original technocrat movement of movement of the 1930s and 40s, it sort of petered out, but it still remained in the background. It petered out in the public consciousness. But then about that time, 1970, whenever Brzezinski's writing his book, that was the revival. That was them saying, this is going to be the new, you know, he kind of calls it technotronic instead of technocratic. Regardless, he's describing the same things. And that quote is a really, I think, an important one that more people need to be aware of. But I just wanted to make that clear. This is not a good guy warning us. This is a guy who knew what was coming because he was very much a part of building it, telling anybody who would actually pay attention, this is where we're going to head. And in fact, there's another quote in there that I don't have before me, but I remember the gist of it, where he says something to the effect that a charismatic leader might rise up and help them create this. And I think that is Donald Trump. I think you're very correct that the tech companies, with all the data they have on us, people need to really look back to Cambridge Analytica, the Cambridge Analytica scandal of the 2016 election. This made some news for a while. You know, there was a whistleblower saying this company is potentially illegally scooping up all the data from Facebook and elsewhere, and then they're creating profiles on voters to learn how to better market to them. I think Steve Bannon was originally involved in Cambridge Analytica. He was one of the board members or something to that extent. And there's other politicians who have said, yes, I paid money to Cambridge Analytica to try to, you know, better market to my audience. So in the most charitable view, you say, okay, this is just politicians using the internet and they're learning how to market to their people. That's what every good business person should do, right? But in the worst case scenario, you actually look deeper into Cambridge Analytica, and they had something that they called psychographics, which was literally them saying that they could get it down. They could create not just graphics like digital material, but just information and posts, internet posts and content creators that would specifically play to our individual biases and our wants and needs. So it was like marketing taken to the nth degree, right? They could literally, they knew what things would trigger this segment of the population and what things would appeal to this segment of the population. Now, armed with that data, you could essentially craft a character or a faux populist resistance and say all the right things and, you know, feed that information to people over time and have them believing that they are a part of the true resistance. And again, like I said to start the conversation, clearly the Biden, Kamala, you know, Clinton, all them, they have been, you know, horrible for a long time. I think that was also part of the operation done by design to make them look as ridiculous as possible. You don't have to be some conspiracy theorist truther to sort of look at the Democrat side and be like, wow, those people are pushing transgender, they're pushing this thing, they're pushing COVID shots. Like that doesn't make sense. But these, you know, Trump folks, they seem to have some common sense and they're saying they're going to get rid of all these bad things. I count some family members among those people who are not really deeply educated about this, but kind of they have kids and they're like, I don't like what these guys are doing. I don't really like everything Trump does, but he sure seems to make a lot more sense. I think that was all by design. I think this was absolutely the good cop, bad cop situation that Patriot Voice was describing earlier, and that it's been a long time play since Trump's very first administration and coming up to where we are now. And then you point out, of course, all the big tech CEOs sitting front row center at the inauguration. I think that's like a perfect illustration of what we have here. You know, the billionaires, and I'm not somebody who hates people just because they're rich, but in this case, these people became billionaires through government subsidies, through military industrial complex contractors. They didn't start a business and work hard by pull up their bootstraps, all this kind of thing. They benefit directly from CIA funding, as you said, In-Q-Tel and others. So this has been something I've been trying to personally warn about since the very first Trump administration, because I could just see that this was the sort of strongman that a lot of people were hoping was going to come fix all the insanity that's been going on. And of course, that insanity only ramped up during the Biden administration. And so, of course, people wanted something different. They wanted somebody to come, please save us from all the bad people and get rid of the the censorship and these kinds of things. And you perfectly outlined it with Elon buying Twitter and that sort of thing. I have been long labeled a black pillar or a doomsayer for calling these things out. I think it's becoming more clear and more obvious, thankfully, to people. And it's not about being like, hey, I was right. It was just, to me, this seemed kind of clear that if the movement of awakened people is actually growing, which I do believe it has been growing since the birth of the internet, this movement of truth seekers has been around way before the internet. People used to have newsletters and books that existed talking about this. But then with the internet, we all got connected and we found each other like, wow, there's people talking about this in Australia and Europe and all across the US and all over the world. And we started to organize better. And the 2010s were a very big time for reaching people through Facebook and through other places. And then we started to see the censorship in 2016, 17, the purges of 2018, and then obviously during COVID. This, I think, is just been a part of their plan to kind of start controlling the resistance. And in fact, what we're witnessing, I tend to call the great inversion. I have an essay on this on my website at The Conscious Resistance, if people want to go read that. I believe this sort of faux resistance is part of that. Like the pendulum is essentially just swinging back to the other extreme. On one hand, it's the like I said, you got the Obama, Clinton, Biden cabal, and then people react to that and they want something different. And so the pendulum swings hard the other way into a sort of faux resistance. And in my belief, it's like that we're still trapped in that left-right paradigm, though. We need to kind of evolve and get beyond and above that. But for the people who are just kind of reading at the surface level, they're seeing, oh, well, the Democrats are crazy and these leftists are destroying the country. So Trump's here to save the day. And of course, you have some people who are like Laura Loomers who are like literally cheering on their own enslavement. But I think the average person is probably just caught in the middle of this and trying to make sense. So I try not to, hold it against people who seem to kind of be lost in the muck, because it's a lot to digest. But I do think we need to start contending with these realities that there's not going to be a politician that's going to come save us. And it's definitely not going to be Donald Trump. But I would predict that in the next couple of years, there will be another faux populist hero to come save us from Donald Trump. And then to say, it's just going to do the whole thing again, right? There's going to be, maybe Bernie will run again, and that'll get the leftists thinking that like, okay, we're going to win in the system again. Or even maybe there's a somewhat of an awakening to what Trump's doing, and JD Vance promises he's going to, take the best parts of Trump, but leave all the bad stuff behind. Whatever it may be some character we haven't even met yet who's so slowly rising up in the political scene right now. But I guarantee you this tactic will be used again because it seems to work very well.
Here's the quote you had mentioned. This is Brzezinski. Says, persisting social crisis, the emergence of a charismatic personality, and the exploitation of mass media to obtain public confidence would be the stepping stones in the piecemeal transformation of the United States into a highly controlled society. Is that the quote that you were thinking of?
Yep, that's it right there. Yep.
So, okay, so taking a step back, looking at, I want to get your take on the Elon and Trump feud and how that fits into this, because, what you mentioned, just as you're closing up that kind of string of thoughts here, was that you're trying to help that person that's kind of in the middle, looking around saying, like, okay, I can't make sense of this. Like, what's really going on? And that's what I see as being a big part of why I'm doing this show and having guests like you is not to come on here and become another person, which is just, here's the absolute black and white truth, believe it or you're an idiot, but to come on and say, okay, so what's really going on here? Like, okay, like this doesn't make sense. If you trace that doesn't make sense, because like we have to be educated about this stuff. And I see a lot of these really prominent conservative accounts on Twitter, ones that say 6 months ago, I was right in lockstep with them. Okay, hey, they really get it. They understand the deep state. But now these are the same accounts that are saying, like, bring in Palantir. And it's like, and talking like that. And it's like, where'd that come from? Like, I don't agree with that. But you can see that a lot of their followers are kind of following in along lines. And so kind of making sense of all this and looking at even the Elon and Trump kind of whole fiasco, like what I noticed at that time was that Palantir was the number one talked about thing on the internet at that time. You go to Twitter, it's everything to talk about Palantir. It's just like, okay, hey, this is great. The next day you wake up Palantir's not even being talked about. All people care about is, oh my gosh, Elon said that Epstein files have Trump information in them, and it's the whole world of quickly just kind of forgot about Palantir. Like, how do you make sense of that?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that assessment. That because one thing I'll say is we have a tendency, just speaking broadly, in the truth movement, the freedom-seeking movement, to maybe always assume one thing is a distraction from another. Obviously, we live in a big world, and there's a million things going on, right? And so maybe there's more than one thing that's important, and we can hold more than one idea. But in this case, I agree wholeheartedly with what you just described there, that I saw the same thing. Palantir's everywhere. Oh my God, I woke up, people are sending me, look, New York Times is talking about Palantir. So-and-so is talking about Palantir. It's like, oh, wow, okay, maybe there's something going on here. And then the next day, of course, friends start sending me screenshots of Elon mentioning Trump in the Epstein files, and that becomes the new thing. So I do tend to be skeptical of this, especially I think it's important for those who, including myself to a bit here, who live on X, who live on Twitter, and maybe don't use any other social media platforms, to step out of that bubble from time to time, because it is a bubble and it's absolutely a pro-Trump centric bubble. Obviously, there's other opinions, but for the most part, the big accounts that I would argue are algorithmically pushed and promoted are absolutely the ones who are backing Trump at all costs. And like you said, people who maybe 6 months ago you thought had some principles and had some values and they're like standing by things. Now you realize, oh, they don't actually have principles. They just care about the personality, and they're going to follow this personality no matter where they go. And they're going to, do their due diligence to praise Trump, even at all costs, even when it makes them go against the things that they claim to be for and against. So I am skeptical that the timing of that was maybe done to pull us away from the Palantir conversation, because the first thing I saw is the New York Times reports on Palantir and the Foundry program, and immediately sort of MAGA world, especially on Twitter, is like, no, this is fake news. Of course, like the knee-jerk reaction, it's New York Times, this is garbage. But really, a lot of the things they're reporting there weren't new. This is stuff that I and others, Whitney Webb and others, have been reporting on for quite a while now. So, that's kind of how I was saying. I was like, look, okay, you don't trust the New York Times. Here's a bunch of other reports. Here's Wired Magazine. Here's these other examples to see how big Palantir has grown. And then, of course, it was really sad to see people like Alex Jones, I mean, just like come to the defense, like, oh, you guys are just blowing this out of proportion. This is not the same Alex Jones that woke me up in 2009, who told me that the left-right paradigm was a lie, and it was part of the control structure, that one day the technological and scientific elite would try to rule everything and essentially do what we're seeing now. Um, Alex Jones, in his defense, or at least trying to downplay Palantir, did not mention the Bilderberg Group one time. This is the same Alex Jones. I know there's people who think he's a clone or whatever, but it's the same Alex Jones, as far as we know, who used to go to the Bilderberg Group and shout at these people with bullhorn and call them out. And now his guy, Trump, again, this is an example of following the personality and not your principles. His guy, Trump, is working with 2 steering committee members of the Bilderberg Group, and there's not a peep out of him. There's not a mention of it. There's nothing, no discussion of that. And that is just, it's mind blowing. It's unfortunate, but it's not the first or the last time we will see that. And so, I'm kind of just, the feud gathered up all the news cycle and took all the air out of the room for a day or so. Maybe nobody's really thinking about it now. One other thing I'll add to there is a theory floating around, and of course we don't have the evidence for it, but it's at least worth considering. Because Musk and Peter Thiel, for those who don't know, they're both part of what's called the PayPal mafia. They're both co-founders of PayPal. So they've known each other for decades. They go back as well. And they both were involved with the big tech decision telling Trump to pick J.D. Vance as his vice president. That was reported in the summer of 2024. All over the mainstream, that they're the ones who actually told Trump, hey, this is who you should have for your VP, when Trump was doing a fundraiser in San Francisco, in Silicon Valley. I think it was June 2024. And at that meeting, according to several people there, he said, so who do you guys like? Who's the people, who's somebody I should look at? And they all said, JD Vance, that's the man. So this guy is the pick of the technocrats, right? And it could be possible, like, let's say the most charitable situation here for those who are hearing this and like, I don't know, guys, I still think Trump's fighting the deep state. They just have overpowered him. He's going up against too big of forces. If that's your belief, that's fine. Okay, imagine that. But even if that is the truth, which I don't necessarily believe, then there's a potential that the technocrats have ganged up on him. Maybe this whole thing was about like, let's support him as much as we can, get him in office with our guy as the VP, and then get all the contracts we want, get Elon up in there and get all his people in Doge. And then Elon steps away from government. There's some big feud. They start attacking Trump. Could this down the line lead to, I don't think Trump will actually be impeached or something like that, but that's kind of the theory some people are playing with, like, hey, maybe this was, let's be friends with Trump, get him in office, and then turn our backs on him because we already got our guy in the vice presidency, and that's really all we need. We've got all our contracts. So that's one option as well. So none of us can say for certain whether Trump is aware or if he's being played. I tend to think he is aware and he's playing a role, but either way, the outcome, I think, is headed in the same direction.
Tax day may have passed, but for millions of Americans, the real trouble is just beginning. If you missed the April 15th deadline, or if you still owe back taxes, the IRS is ramping up enforcement. Every day you wait, it only makes things worse. With over 5,000 new tax liens filed daily and tools like property seizures, bank levies, and wage garnishments, the IRS is applying pressure at levels we haven't seen in years. Increased administrative scrutiny means collections are moving fast. The good news, there's still time for Tax Network USA to help. Are you self-employed or a business owner? Even if your books are a mess, they've got it covered. Tax Network USA specializes in cleaning up financial chaos and getting you back on track fast. Even after the deadline, it's not too late to regain control. Your consultation is completely free, and acting now could stop penalties, threatening letters, and surprise levies before they escalate. Call 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/MIA. You may have missed April 15th, but you haven't run out of options. Let Tax Network USA help before the IRS makes the next move. Again, that's 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/MIA. I'd say there's two very unhealthy syndromes in America. There's TDS and TWS. There's Trump derangement syndrome and Trump worship syndrome. And, for me, like, I don't worship any man. That's my own principles. And, I try to look at Trump objectively. And I think there's certain people that will watch this interview and say, oh, you're anti-Trump and you're black-pilled. And because they've been through so much trauma, especially the past 4 or 5 years, it's like, you can't now tell them that what they've been hoping and praying for the last 4 years that finally came true is also not true. It's like it starts to break the reality open. But for me, I'm looking at this and saying objectively, it's like, okay, say we have a neighbor and say you really trust this neighbor a lot and he's a good gunman, you live in like a bad neighborhood. And so he says, hey, you know what, Derek, I'm gonna mount this little machine gun up here so I can watch your house. And if there's any bad guys coming, I'm a machine gun, I can mow them down. You might be like, oh, okay, I've known you for 10 years. You're great. Thank you. I love the peace of mind. The problem is when that guy moves out and the next guy moves in, if that same system is still there, that same machine gun, what if this guy's a serial killer and now he's got a gun pointing at your house? And that's how I look at these systems. Even if hypothetically Trump is a saint and he was sent here on a mission by God to free America from the deep state, if these systems are being put into place, once he's out, what if the next person that comes in is Gavin Newsom or like a Klaus Schwab type character? And now they've got this massive apparatus that Trump may have built for the good of the people, but now can be used for the evil will of the elites. That's what concerns me.
That's the danger of what Laura Loomer and people like her are calling for, right? Is like saying, okay, well, roll out, and it's so crazy to me. It's like after everybody had their moment of outrage, she and other MAGA are just full on embracing it. Now, of course, she's really close to Trump, so I think she's probably going to be the sycophant to the very end. But saying, roll it out, Palantir, go after all these protesters and these illegal immigrants, exactly what you said. Okay, even if you thought that was the best move ever and Trump is a saint, are the Democrats going to use it the same way, a way that you like, or is JD Vance or some other future president? There's no way to know. And ultimately, I believe that is part of the operation because you can, I'm only 40 years old, so I started paying attention to politics at 18 in a vague way, anti-war, anti-Iraq war, watch the bombings happen. That kind of radicalized me at a young age before I really kind of woke up and realized both parties are sort of serving the same masters. But when you start to study it, you see, okay, well, Bush was just picking up on policies that started before him, and then he passed those on. Then Obama came in claiming he was going to be the constitutional lawyer and end the spying and the wars. And then what did he do? Did the same thing, expanded it, became the drone king. And then Trump comes in and says, it's just this baton that kind of gets passed back and forth. And sure, there are differences. We could talk about differences when it comes to abortion or transgender issues and these sorts of things. But when it comes to war, when it comes to surveillance, when it comes to Zionism, when it comes to a lot of these bigger issues, I think it doesn't really change. It just gets, the ground is laid by Biden, and then people complain about it. And then Trump comes in and he picks up the baton and builds on it and does his own thing. And then his people say, no, it's a good time. It's a good thing when he's doing it. And I think that's just what people should also kind of look at in a deeper way, the foundation of these systems, that as long as we're playing those back and forth, I don't think we're ever going to really see change. What we're going to see is more disappointment, more hope and change, more make America great again, whatever it is, more slogans, and people are going to fall for them. And I just don't think that that's the way to building a better world.
And so what can we do? And this is something that I'm constantly thinking about. Obviously, if I had my way and life was whatever I wanted it to be, I'd probably sell up everything and move my family to like a little shack in a Caribbean island and just live out my days, off grid, right? But I'm not going to do that for a lot of different reasons. So, like, what are, like, for people that see this, like, obviously you think, okay, so during, Biden, you're seeing all these bad things happening. Okay, hey, if we can just get Trump in, we can undo a lot of these things. We can close the border. There's a lot of this external pressure that we put onto White House and the DC circuit. Like, okay, they're going to make the changes that we need to create, freedom and prosperity in America. But in this situation where we've had a massive change, in the ruling class of America, we have a new, president. We've got a lot of, kind of conservative Republican control of the government now, and we see what's happening. What can we do? Because anybody that says, "Oh, well, midterms or whatever," it's like forget about you, right? But
it's not sufficient enough anymore,
no,
right?
no. It's like what are some practical things that we can do though?
That's the question, right? I mean, I'm glad you're asking this, and we're getting into some of this. Of course, I'll just preface this by saying I don't claim to have all of the solutions. I think I have some ideas that have worked for me. I also wouldn't rule out that Caribbean island just yet. The future might necessitate it. But I think fundamentally, one of the things is what we've just been discussing here for the last few moments is questioning the foundation of the very system. And I don't even mean just the United States, but just politics in general. Personally, I am a voluntarist, which is sometimes called an anarchist. It just means that I believe that all relationships should be voluntary and consensual. And so, for example, you and I, we arranged an interview. We're both choosing to be here. Nobody's got a gun to either of our heads. We're having this dialogue. This is completely voluntary and consensual, right? And I think most people would say they want their relationships to be that way. You don't want to be forced to associate with people that you don't necessarily want to for whatever reason. And, that's a foundational, I think, importance of all human relationships. But then when you start to kind of look at how we interact with government, we realize that government is not voluntary nor consensual, because we're forced to pay taxes, we're forced to do other things, and all of those things are done at the threat of violence. I think most people would say, sure, they might want to contribute some money if it's going to go to better schools in their community or fix the roads, but they don't necessarily want to be funding bombs in Israel. They don't want to be funding the surveillance state. They don't want to be funding this thing, or maybe they don't want to fund, other programs. The point is that all of those things are being done at the threat of the gun. We all know that if you find ways to avoid taxes, you run the risk of the IRS coming after you, men with guns showing up at your house, starting to ask questions, starting to go through your accounts, auditing you. Eventually, it could get to the point of garnishing your wages. And in the long term, it could get to putting you in a cage if they say, well, you didn't pay your extortion fee and things like that. That's the very opposite of a consensual and voluntary relationship. So this leads me to essentially being, like I said, a voluntarist and an anarchist. It doesn't mean that I believe there's going to be some perfect utopian world that is even possible. I think my days of believing in such a thing have faded from the early days of my activism, but I still hold those values to be fundamental for me. And the reason I share that is to say, even if you don't fully subscribe to those beliefs, I think getting to the root of our problems is really the key. I can throw out some other ideas, practical things, but I also think on a spiritual and psychological level, we have to question the foundations of the system that we're all born into, that says, there's a person out there that is smart and intelligent and bright enough and cares about you, and we all just need to go vote them. And that one person working with these other people, these other flawed humans just like us, are going to fix all of our problems. What is essentially happening is we're outsourcing our power. Now, granted, some of the problems we're facing, you and I can't solve on our own. You and I and our neighbors can't just go fix the border, or we can't, stop the bombs from dropping and things like that. So I understand that a lot of the problems are out of our hands. They're essentially out of our hands, and unfortunately, they're in the hands of psychopaths who do not have our best interests at heart. But I think on a foundational level, besides practical things like I think it's great to avoid big banks and switch to local credit union. I think it's great to opt out of the facial recognition at the airport, to opt out of any sort of apps that require facial scanning and any biometrics, to opt out of this growing technocratic state where and when you can. Those are important, and I live by those, and I promote those, and those are all in my book, and people can download that for free. But if we just keep marching forward and expecting that every 2 to 4 years, like you said, people are going to start talking about the midterms soon, and it's going to be, oh, this is how we're going to solve everything. But we're not going to. We need to grow up, I think. We need to recognize that trying the same thing over and over and expecting different results is the definition of insanity, and that people have been trying the system over and over and over. I mean, even if you're the most diehard constitutionalist, and that is, I think, a very powerful historical document, the Constitution has not been followed for a long time. The Constitution has been, there's a great quote actually from one of the early American individualist anarchists, who's a brilliant man named Lysander Spooner. People can go look him up from the 1800s. He has this really brilliant quote in one of his essays called The Constitution of No Authority. And you have to think that this guy is writing 50 to 60 years after the Constitution has come into power. So like he's living it right then. And already he was pointing out examples of how the federal government was already starting to become powerful back then. And I remember there's even a part where he says, they have Gatling guns now. There's no way we're going to defeat them through violence and force. That was way before drones. But even back then, he's like, they've already got enough manpower that we can't stop them physically. And they're already violating the Constitution. And so he says, either the Constitution was incapable of preventing the growth of the government, and in that case, it's basically meaningless, or it actually allowed it, and in that case, it's actually a danger to humanity. So one way or the other, I know some people like to uphold it as this sort of almost biblical document that is infallible, but one way or the other, the Constitution itself was not capable of preventing what we're seeing today 200 years later. The government has grown well beyond those means, and we could argue, well, they didn't actually follow it. If only we had people following it. But then that goes back to my argument about the foundation. Humans are flawed. We all know this. Like, we are not the creator, we are the creation, and we are flawed. And so if we keep outsourcing our power and thinking that other flawed humans are going to be like God and perfect and run things and not have any conflicts of interest and not make any mistakes or not look out for their own egos and things like that, we are going to continue cycling through this over and over. And I really do fear that, because I don't think the coming generations will ever know freedom if we don't find a way out of this cycle that allows this violence to continue. And so, I mean, I kind of think, I know that's not a perfect, here's a to-do list, 1, 2, 3. I do have such things in my book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. People can download that for free at theconsciousresistance.com/how-to and learn more about that. But I just wanted to kind of focus on that. I think that really there's some foundational things that we need to, assumptions that we need to question here, so that we don't just keep having this conversation in 4 more years when there's a new president, and then when there's another one coming along promising to save the day. I really would like to not live the rest of my life just watching people making these same mistakes over and over, and watching populist movements arise, and then people get disappointed as that person sells out or embraces things they claim they were against. And we've seen it on the left, we've seen it on the right, and I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. So instead, perhaps it's up to us to start questioning those assumptions.
And I think one of the most important things we can do is just have conversations like this, is just questions of just asking, oh, okay, well, what does this look like? And yeah, that's kind of concerning over there. And oh, you hear about this Palantir thing, and God, just trying our best to show people what's really going on, right? To kind of pulling the mask off a little bit and say, okay, well, this is actually what Palantir is. It's actually what Facebook is, right? And so hopefully people, if people have made it this far and they're not angry for us not coming on here and saying that Trump, can do no bad. I think that I encourage people to share this conversation, because I look at this as, I know that you see it for what it is, and you've dedicated a large chunk of your life to fight against this. But I look at the rise of AI and technocracy and these digital systems as the greatest threat to our freedom. I mean, as much as, say, a couple of years ago, it was communist overthrow or this or or different kind of neighboring enemies or whatever it was. Like I really do believe though that the rise of a digital police state is our greatest threat. I mean, look at China. Like go look at mainland China. What's it like to live there with facial recognition like at different zones? Like you can't even go into the other zone without having a face scan. Like they know where every person is at all times in that country. They've got hundreds of millions of cameras everywhere, and that's not the society I want to live in. And so, even though I can't overthrow a government or I can't run for office and make some big change, I can at least do my very best to get as many Americans as possible to ask these questions. I know that you've done a great job in doing that, and so I thank you for giving us your time, and thank you for just what you've made your life's mission.
Absolutely, and I just want to emphasize that I agree with you, man. I think that this is the fight of our lives. I mean, this is why I've been kind of in through my journalism and activism. I've focused on digital privacy for years. It's just became like a big important piece of the puzzle for me. But I focus on other issues, and to be sure, there's plenty of other things to debate and to get into. There's other threats to humanity. But in 2019, when I started to just realize that at that point, AI was very much in its infancy, at least publicly, as far as we know. I'm sure there's private military AI that's been around for much longer than we even know. But facial recognition, these things were clearly a danger, and there was not really too many people talking about it in 2019. And then I published my book in 2020. It was because of this. Is because to me, like, all right, I need to like narrow my focus. I think this is the threat: technocracy, AI, facial recognition, what they're building. And I'm grateful that 5 years later, we're having these conversations and that others are having these conversations. I really hope people will kind of question some of the fundamental assumptions again of how we got here. And before we wrap up, I did want to. I know you mentioned this to me earlier. I did want to at least spend a moment on these protests in LA because I think you had some important things to share that I might
Oh,
like to
sure.
comment on.
Yeah, actually, one thing I wanted to pull up was this website right here. This No Kings. So this is nokings.org. This appears to be the main organization that's driving this. Now, one thing they're talking about is on June 14th, they're hosting a nationwide Rise Up, right? That's what they call it. So this right here, and this is crazy. This is a map of all of the different protest locations that are going to be happening on June 14th. I mean, this is just like, look at the density. Say you're over here in Boston or I mean, absolutely insane, but this is what they've got planned is literally massive nationwide protests and who knows what this could turn into. I guess just be prepared, right? But anyway, I'll let you comment on this though, Derek.
Yeah, so I mean, I hadn't seen this until you brought it up to me prior to us starting this conversation, and I started to look at check out the partners page there, and if people look at that, I mean, it's pretty much a who's who of left wing kind of Democrat organizations. Some of them are more mainstream, like you got Catholics voting for common good, climate hawks. There's all kinds of groups. You got Greenpeace, stuff like that. So it definitely seems to me like familiar movements I've seen in the past that tend to be left wing and things of that sort. And I think a lot of this audience probably won't jive with obviously the left wing or Democrats. What the thing I wanted to add to this that I find interesting is I often find myself at these events because not only as a journalist, but because as we've outlined here, I don't support Trump's agenda in many ways. I don't support things that are going on. I definitely wouldn't say I could attend one of these protests and be perfectly in line with every poster I saw or every flyer saw being handed out. But that's kind of a position I'm used to being in. I mean, just as an example, I was speaking out at COVID protest in Houston, Texas, where I'm originally from, and it looks like there's no Kings are going to be there as well. There'll be something happening in Houston. I was speaking at events against COVID, and most of these events were people who were waving like Blue Lives Matter flags, who were waving Trump flags, and things that again like aren't really my positions. But I try to put those things aside when there's a bigger issue. Like I can sit there and have a cup of coffee, or I can, march along somebody, even recognizing like, all right, we're not going to agree on every single issue, and that's okay. But at this moment, at that time, we're standing against COVID tyranny, right? So maybe this person likes Trump more than I do, and I think they might have some blind spots, but I'm going to stand with them because this issue matters. And the funny thing is, I remember at the COVID protest in Houston during COVID, some of my activist friends who might be more left leaning, they showed up and they start counter protesting. So of course they see me there, and in their mind, I'm just some right winger, blah, blah, whatever, people who are still stuck in that kind of dichotomy. And I saw the same thing happen when I was there as a journalist at the George Floyd protest in Houston. I actually got arrested filming, just some of the scene. And Houston wasn't like a lot of the other cities. Houston's not really a place where riots happen and violence. It's just never really been part of the city's kind of movements. But sure, people were out in the streets doing their things. And once again, I definitely wouldn't agree with every sign there. I wouldn't agree with every position. But broadly speaking, there were some things I did agree with. And so I often find myself in these kind of unique positions where, okay, I can agree with one thing. I wish there was a different group organizing, like with this No Kings thing, just an example. Like, I wish it wasn't being organized by groups that are obviously connected to the DNC and obviously connected to the Democratic Party, right? I wish that there was a movement of people like us that was out there organizing and saying, yes, we don't like Elon Musk and we have questions about Donald Trump and Palantir, but we also don't blindly accept your progressive agenda either, right? Like, where's that movement at? I don't know. We're not really organizing in the streets, but so I just wanted to say that I do think it's important for people to get out in the streets and to I think protest still has a place. I also think it's unfortunate that in the case of this, like if you're somebody hearing this and you've got questions about Peter Thiel and Donald Trump, et cetera, going to one of these protests, you're probably going to be surrounded by people who are more left leaning, Democratic voters, maybe left wing radicals of different types. And if you're okay with that, then go there, try to find alliances. I think it is important to build bridges. And at the same time, I also understand yours and other people's kind of concern of seeing the massive protests and like, are we in for another summer of 2020 where this is going to turn into, violence in some cities? That typically is isolated. Like we saw, I mean, sometimes it happens in New York, it happens in LA, Chicago, some of those kind of cities. Like I said, Houston's not really a place. So I would not wager that every single one of these dots on this map is going to turn into some kind of bad, scary situation, but I wouldn't be surprised if a few of them do. And who benefits from that? Well, probably Palantir, probably the military industrial complex, probably a lot of these people that were sitting at the front row of Trump's administration. So it's going to be interesting. You said that's coming up June 19th?
June 14th. And actually, it's funny, you mentioned about, I can imagine there's going to be a fair bit of these, which are just a bunch of old white liberals sitting in lawn chairs holding up a sign that says like honk if like
they're not all like as radical as people like to make them out to be. That's what kind of my point is. Like, I get that some people might see this and like, oh my God, it's about to be, revolution or something, but most of them are going to be that. These are going to be like old Bernie supporters, old hippies who are
young college kids with signs and pickets.
Kids. Some of them might have radical beliefs. Some of them are just like, hey, things are bad. I want to go hold the sign. And most of the time, the people show up and they're holding some sign that was pre-made by some big organization, which may have George Soros links, and they have no idea what they're doing. They're just like, okay, yeah, I generally agree with this. They do their couple of hours and then they leave and they go to the cafe and they move on with their life. That's what most of them are my experience. For the most part, highly ineffective, highly ineffective. Like, sure, it's important. I don't want to discourage people from expressing themselves and getting out on the streets for causes they believe in, whether it's this one or anything else. But in my experience, if that's where it ends and it's like, okay, we did our few hours in the sun, we held some signs, we chanted, we yelled at some people, passed out a few flyers, that can feel powerful. It can be like, yes, I'm expressing myself. And that's an important step. And I think the process of becoming an awakened being. But if that's where it ends, nothing's going to change. Just like with voting, like those things alone aren't going to fix our problems. So whether this is your movement or some other future movement, again, I invite people to maybe look at some of the deeper foundational problems we have and see how we can pull away from those.
I couldn't agree more, man. I'll bring your website up one more time. I'll put the link in the description as well. theconsciousresistance.com. You've got a bunch of resources on there, tons of resources. Also encourage people to follow you over at Twitter. What's your handle? This is at Derek Broze.
It's just D as in Derek, Broze, my last name, live free. So D Broze, live free.
Okay, there we go. Well, Derek, thank you for coming on, man. It's always great speaking with you. And I hope that hopefully this conversation reaches a lot of ears, because we need to be having these discussions if we care about the future of our country. And again, I don't want to fall into either side of that, either deranged syndrome or worship syndrome. I want to be in the middle where I'm vigilant. I'm saying, okay, I like these 5 things, but I don't like those 3 things. And it's like the more Americans that can do that and think independently, that's what's going to lead us out of this. And I appreciate what you've been doing to help people with that process.
I 100% agree, and thank you for the position you're staking and for your podcast. I've been catching up on some of your recent episodes. You're doing great work, brother, and I appreciate your voice out here. We need more like you.
Thank you so much. So I hope that was a beneficial interview for you. Hopefully it wasn't too much of a black pill interview. But as we closed out, and I think it's important for us to have these discussions because I want to be aware of what the threats are. I want to be aware of what's happening that could affect my daily life, that could affect the future of this country for my children, and so much more. And one thing that I've become way more aware of right now is just the importance of privacy. I'm thinking, okay, gosh, like look at all these different smart items. And like my wife and I, we're very, very vigilant. We don't get smart TVs and all this stuff, but it's still everywhere, this technology. And I've been really doing a pretty fundamental, I guess, assessment of how secure am I? How much of my information am I sharing with these digital systems? And once you start asking that question, it is a long journey. But what's interesting is that I'm actually putting on this week with literally the Privacy Academy, we're having a free webinar. So if you are curious, you want to learn how can I protect myself from a digital big tech surveillance state, this is literally going to be a free webinar. It'll probably go on for an hour or two, like walking you through all of the fundamentals of how to start protecting yourself from an AI digital super system that is going to be surveilling everything that you do, that you allow them to surveil. So meeting with Glenn and Eric Meter, they create this company called the Privacy Academy. They teach people how to become private. They teach you how to stop all these big companies from collecting data on you, different options. Say you don't want to go with the iPhone or the Apple, you don't trust Google, you don't trust Apple. There's a bunch of other options. So, are VPNs safe? Is Proton Mail safe? What email should we be using? Is Google, all their free products like Google Maps and Gmail, are they stealing things from us? Are they using that against us? We're going to be covering all this stuff and more on this webinar. So the webinar is on Thursday, June 12th at 11 Central or 12 p.m. Eastern. So 11 a.m. Central. So this Thursday, if you're working or for some reason you can't catch that webinar, you should still sign up for it because you can watch it afterwards. I'll be there live. There's going to be Q&As, and we're literally going to be meeting with two of the world's kind of supreme experts in online privacy. Glenn, who I've interviewed actually last week about this exact topic. He is a brilliant guy when it comes to understanding how can we protect ourselves from a digital police state. So there's going to be a link for this in the description. And again, it's a free webinar, right? So that's it. You don't have to put your credit card in and all that. It's literally just a free webinar. You can sign up. They've got more training if you want access to it. But the idea is that, okay, how can we teach as many people as possible about this ahead of time? So the link is going to be in the description below. This Thursday, 11 a.m. Central is going to be the class. Your computer is spying on you. Here's how to stop it. Okay. All right. Thank you for watching the show. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you share, and I'll see you next time. Take care.